All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's broadcast for SharePoint Records Management and Compliance. My name is Amy Vara, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Gimmal, and I'm joined by one of our solutions engineers, Sue Gibbons, today. Hi, Sue.
Hey, Amy. How are you?
I'm good. So before we get started, just want to review a few housekeeping items with everybody. We are recording today's sessions, and we'll make that available to you within a few 24 to 48 hours of this session. We love questions, so please submit your questions through the question and answer button at the top of your screen, and we'll answer as many of those as we have time for at the end of the session. If you have any technical issues, you can also let us know through the question and answer button, and I will be happy to help you as much as I can. So as an attendee for today's session, you're familiar with SharePoint as a platform for collaboration. However, the ease of creating SharePoint sites and the tremendous volume of information being generated and stored often leads to a lack of governance. This increases risk exposure for your organization. It also results in content that is difficult to find and to use, and your employees and users start to abandon the processes and systems. That's where Gimmal comes in. Today, Sue is going to show you how Gimmal transforms SharePoint and Office 365 into a true enterprise content management system. Working either standalone products or all together, the Gimmal solutions deliver value to organizations of all sizes. So I'm going to turn it over to Sue, and she's going to show you how it works.
Thank you, Amy. So before we start off and get into the demo, I just wanted to talk about some records management challenges that we've seen over the years. So we did a little study, and we asked people, do you have a legally defensible records retention schedule? And you can see here by the results, 43% said, yes, we do. 34% said, yeah, we do, but we have some reservations. Maybe we only have it for physical records, or we're in the process of redoing our retention schedule. And surprisingly, 23% said, no, we do not. Now, a defensible retention schedule is all about creating a consistency on how we're managing our intellectual property, i.e. our records. And that intellectual property is either our electronic records, it could be our physical records, and also can be our email records. And the fact is that we want to be able to provide a process that if I had to go to a court of law, I can say without doubt that I am managing retention in a consistent way, I'm managing security of those records in a consistent way, and the disposition of records is automatically happening for me, right? Now, if we take that question, we asked another question saying, okay, so you have records, obviously have records today. How many of you actually do allow your users to classify or create, classify what is a record at the time of creation or later on in the life cycle? And what I mean by life cycle is that typically we have a life cycle of information, we collaborate on information, we go through the version control, and at some point when we're done, that could be considered that intellectual property that I was talking about before, and we now need to put it under the records retention process. And reality is that 65%, that's a pretty high percent, of people or organizations say that the users do not classify records and actually probably have no understanding of what to do. And we also have the issue where people are hoarders, where people keep that information in their desktop, and honestly, keeping that information too long is a risk to the organization. If we look at this a little bit further, think about just a records retention process. Well, how many of you, we asked another group of people, how many of you actually go out there and review your retention schedule on a periodic basis? So 74% said, we don't do it. And 15% said, yeah, we do. We have an audit and review. Now, the fact is that that's another risk area for you. So if I am not out there looking at my retention schedule on a periodic basis, how do I know I'm complying with all the government laws, the federal laws, as well as your business changes? How do I know that I'm maintaining my official and my intellectual property based on my new changes to my business? So when we look at this, I'm going to bring up another slide here. We only have one more slide after this. I'm not going to slide you to death. I'm going to build this all out, and we're going to talk about it. When we look at how Gimmal helps from the standpoint of compliance of records, this is a study that one of our great partners, Bruce Miller, did. And if we look at SharePoint out of the box, at what it does, and SharePoint does a fairly good job with records management, it can do retention policies. But the policies are all time-based, and it can classify records, which means I can identify different types of records within SharePoint. Fantastic. And that may be all you need. However, for some organizations where they need to do a little bit more advanced type of process, you may need to do things like forensic destruction, what I talk about. Forensic destruction is when I say dispose of a record, I want you to digitally shred it. Those of you who work with physical records are pretty familiar with that when I have that box and I'm done with it, it goes through a shred or a burn process. Same type of concept with electronic. Also, from the standpoint of advanced record keeping, we want to do event-based retention. Sue Gibbons been with Gimmal for 5 years. I have amassed a number of records about me. Instead of when I win the lottery and move on and go see the world, I want to trigger all those records for destruction. And the second thing I want to do is create a case file. So Sue Gibbons' record folder is that 5 years worth of records. And instead of me having to approve each and every one of them, I'm going to approve her case, and that's going to go on. The last two components for advanced records is managing consistent approach, not only for electronic records, but your email records and your physical records. So a lot of you probably have an email archive solution. I personally don't. I do believe that email archive is a policy management for emails. However, if I want to have a consistent approach, a retention program for SharePoint, then I want to have a policy that applies not only to my electronic records, but my email and my physical as well. Now, physical we'll talk about. If I have time today, I'm going to show you our physical information management. If I don't, because I only have a half hour, and I'll try to talk really fast, please call us up and I'd be happy to do a demo for you. The other 168 components are a little bit more esoteric. For those of you who are federal or state and local government, you may have a need, or maybe even in Canadian government as well, you may have a need where you need to do a transfer of your records as part of your disposition process to an archive. So it could be an archive like NARA. And when I transfer that information, I want to not only send all my electronic records, but I want to send the metadata in the format that archive can use to consume it, right? Very important. The other things from a federal, we have the ability to do cutoff and closure, cutoff at the end of a fiscal year, close a container. That may be relevant to some of the Fortune 1000, where if I have invoices and at the end of my month of invoices, I cut it off so no more invoices go into that record folder, I could use that cutoff process or that closure process. Vital records also is another one of those that kind of can span over to the Fortune 1000, where I may have records that are necessary for disaster recovery or business continuity, or I have records that I need that I have that are permanent preservation and I want to have an eyeball on it. And then from the standpoint of security, I can do an additional layer of security based on these markings. Now, extending beyond all of this, and I'm sure some of you have attended the other sessions, webinars that we've provided, Gimmal also provides some consistency in how we create sites, how we decommission sites, how we can consistently apply metadata across your SharePoint environments, whether it's O365 or 2013 or Azure. The ability to do usability enhancements from our internet portal, our personal sidebar, our drop zones, our document center, all those things are all about enhancing that end user experience and creation of records or creation of content in SharePoint, which may become records. And then from an SAP standpoint, our ERP link is all about creating, taking that document center process and moving it into SharePoint, managing the documents in SharePoint, whether it's an early or late archiving process. So what Gimmal is really doing is record enabling SharePoint and SAP, so pretty cool. Now, one thing before I jump into a demo, I've been asked this question many times, why is DoD really important, right? There's a lot of companies out there that have records management solutions for SharePoint, right? And a lot of them do a great job. I'm never going to diss any of our competitors. However, a lot of them take that, do the retention, the records management, and keep it outside of SharePoint, right? They put it out, the policy management's outside of SharePoint. That enables them to do different things than, if you're a SharePoint pure. But when we talk about DoD certification, it is the way for you to provide or tell the organization that you have a defensible and consistent approach to records management for electronic and physical records. And the certification, again, allows you to create an advanced process for managing a retention schedule, doing time and event disposition, vital records, and then enhanced security. So I'm going to pop out of this demo. Oh, and yeah, I forgot to tell you about this. Gimmal is the only, and truly the only, native DoD SharePoint solution that is Chapter 2, 3, and 5 certified, Chapter 5 being classified. And what I mean by native is that we use SharePoint as the repository. So there are a lot of DoD certified solutions that are certified with SharePoint where the content is as not actually stored in SharePoint, is stored in a third-party, another ECM solution. We are the only one that manages the whole records management process within SharePoint. So I'm going to pop over for a demo because we have about not tons of time today. If you guys need to see a further demo on this, I'll be happy to show it to you. But we're going to start off just with content in SharePoint. Now, I know I've done another session earlier in this series where we talked about policy management, and everything that goes into SharePoint can have a policy on it. And we can see here we have these drop zones, but I'm going to start off where content is in SharePoint and we have policy on it. Now, the fact is, and where companies have fallen down from the standpoint of records management, is if I ask my user to identify what a HUM02 is or a ACC10 is, if I ask them to understand records management, that's going to be a pound sign fail for that one because no one's ever going to do it. But if I ask my user to do one thing, if you could tell me when you're done with it by a simple change of a field, and we're going to take this file that just came into SharePoint, and we're going to change this content state to final. By a simple change of a field, I can take content, automatically declare it as a mutable record, classify it. Remember that point about 75% didn't do or 65% didn't do classification. Classify it into the appropriate category. And as a user, I don't need to know anything about records management. So let's hope that this whole process works today. I'm going to save this. And what's happening behind the scenes, just for those of you who like the details, we have some tools as part of Gimmal's kit that allows us to say, based on the change of a field, I'm going to take my content and I'm going to move it somewhere. And in this case, I'm going to move it over to my record center. So if we look, my file, my benefit registration for Simpson has now, I left a little stub behind. If we go to look at it, it's now under the control of records management. I'm going to pop this up a little bit bigger so everyone can see. So it's now under the control of HUM02 for human resources. And if we went to look at that in the record center, now Gimmal's records management is all focused on the use of a record center. So a record center is like an archive for your records. Now there are two ways of doing records in SharePoint. I could do a manage in place, which means my records are in all my different team sites, and as a records manager, I'm going to go out to those team sites and perform those actions for approving the disposition. Or I can use a record center, which is more of a standard way or a more advanced way of doing records management, where I have a standard set of retention schedules. I have record series. You can see here I have record series for accounting and finance and HR. And under those record series, I have my record categories. So the one that we just did actually went into benefit plans, HUM02, and by the file automatically get classified in there, what actually happened, let's go look at the one that we just put in there, it actually now has security applied to it, it has policy applied to it, and it's automatically been classified. So if we went to look at the details on this one, compliance details, we can see that this record is going to be kept for 6 years from the time that it's declared. And after that, we're going to kick off a process where someone's going to approve the destruction of the record in the metadata. The biggest thing that I want you to get out of that whole process that we just did is that the end user doesn't need to know your retention schedule. Honestly, the end user could care less what a HUM02 is versus a HUM09, right, what are personal non-medical files. What Gimmal is doing in creating this retention schedule is ensuring that when files come in and they're automatically classified, security is automatically applied, policy is automatically applied, and if I was doing legal holds, I could also apply a hold to it. Okay? Very, very cool process. If we look at this from the standpoint of an email, So we talked about electronic records coming in and those under the control of records management. Let's think about emails as well. Now, again, a lot of you have an email solution, right? An email archive solution. But likely that email archive solution is not under the control, is not following your records retention policies. So what we can do is that same records management. So I'm going to come in here. I have employee files for Sue Gibbons. Oops, we're going to go look at this one instead. Here, I'm actually in my record center. Just going to pop back over here just so you don't think I'm making up things. Here's my record center. Here's my Sue Gibbons folder. Now I'm in Outlook. And I'm a user who spends my life in Outlook. I'm sure most of you do. And in Outlook, I can look at the same information. Oh, come on now. Being a little picky with me. Same information that I have within my SharePoint environment. So I don't actually open up a browser to look at my records. As long as I have security to access it, I can access it through Outlook. And what I can also do is I can take emails and drag and drop them and put them in and make them records. So we know that a lot of decision making happens within emails. That's just the way it is. The world has changed. So if I took this file and I now decide this artwork is part of my email records, and we're going to call this an email correspondence. Let's see. It can automatically capture things like the to, the from, the CC, BCC, and so forth, right? So you can see here that I have part of my email header, things like the from, the to, the CC sent are automatically captured, which means now all that information is available to me if I have the security access to look at that record and managed as a record within SharePoint. It's now considered immutable. Now I can open up that email, do a reply to it like I normally do. However, it's under the control of my record program. Pretty cool. The other thing that we've done from an email standpoint is we think about those emails and all those attachments. Now, if that email had an attachment and that attachment was actually the record, I could have taken that attachment, dragged it over, put it into records management, and now that record is now under the control. But if I have an email and that email has attachments, I have some capabilities that Gimmal has added for emails that are specific to how you potentially want to manage emails as records. So I can take my email and this attachment, which is a security plan for 2012, and manage it as one record, put it under one category, and that's the retention it's going to have. Or I could have taken the security plan for 2012, put it into, say, my security, another record category for my retention schedule, give it its own set of metadata, and then what Gimmal's going to do is maintain a relationship between the attachment and the email. So truly, the ability for us to manage emails in an effective way is actually in place. We just saw how emails are now under the same control from a record standpoint as my electronic records. If we think about the retention schedule, and I mentioned that earlier in the session, doing this out of the box in SharePoint, not so easy. So if you're a records manager or if you've tried it in SharePoint, really what you have to do is you need to know how to, and you want to put it into a record center, one-to-many record centers, you need to know how to create these record libraries, create containers, create retention roles, and create security. Now, if I was, say, part of tax, and my miscellaneous tax now changed, instead of keeping it for 2 years, I want to keep it for 5 years or 10 years, I have to know how to change it, right? And as my laws change, that's back to the same thing. Do we audit our retention schedule? As my laws change, I have to have an easy way for a records manager or my records staff to come back in and modify my retention schedule. So in looking at this, Gimmal thought, well, you know what? There has to be a better way for these poor records managers. Let's give them a tool that allows them to build a record program in SharePoint once, and then allows them to use that as the basis for any changes that they need to do within their retention schedule. So you see here, this tool is what we call our file plan builder, and this is all about creating the components of a retention schedule. So if you think about your retention schedule, there are likely a number of business requirements, regulations, citations that you use to determine the length of time you keep your records. And with each one of these, we can maintain these in the tool and actually put a status on it, whether it's new, updated, active, superseded, and so forth. And we tie them into the authority code. We have the ability of creating retention. So we noticed before that we have retention. That retention that I put in was 6 years for my benefit reports. Well, 6 years for benefit reports, maybe I have tax or maybe I have corporate categories that also use that 6 years. Why do I have to recreate the rule again? I create the rules once and I can reuse them. The other thing that we've done, and this is something that SharePoint doesn't do out of the box, is given you the ability to identify records retention where you have records that are based on an event. So here's an example of an event that an employee is terminated, right? Or an employee is not terminated, maybe they retire, or in my case, I'm going to win the lottery tomorrow. So if I win the lottery tomorrow, I have an event. This is part of what Gimmal provides, and this is what we call our enterprise events. This enterprise events is pretty cool because what it allows us to do is create events and apply them not only to my official records, but I can also apply them to my collaboration sites. So if Sue Gibbons wins the lottery tomorrow, I want to go out to all my sites. Here's my win the lottery tomorrow. Woohoo! Sue Gibbons wins the lottery tomorrow. I want to go out to all my team sites as well as my records, find everything that has to do with Sue Gibbons. And in this case, I'm looking based on metadata because metadata is key. I hope you guys join in for next week because we're going to talk about metadata, the necessary evil. It's really kind of a cool one. My colleague Sanjeev is doing that. But the attribute here allows us to say, look for everything that has to do with Sue Gibbons. And if it was a large organization, I could actually use other attributes like, look for Sue Gibbons. She's in the Department of Sales. She's from the Northeast. And when I put in that trigger date, guess what? That retention for all those records that it finds that meets that criteria are automatically going to start happening. Now, as part of what we do for disposition, we give you a bunch of different disposition workflows. These are approval workflows, and each one of these can be configured so you can create a destruction certificate. So a lot of you are very familiar with a physical box. When you burn or shred a physical box, you get a destruction certificate from that third-party archive or the third party who's doing it. Same thing can happen with your electronic records as well. I can actually do a destroy. So when I put this all together into a file plan, we can create an N-tier file plan. Let's look at my audits. I can create an N-tier file plan where I have my audits, and let's look at my audit records, my audits records, not very well named. I can give a description of those audit records, and here's my disposition. I'm keeping it for 7 years. It's based on a declare date. Now, when we talk about dates, we can start retention on any date in SharePoint, or we can base it on event. Or if you're a federal customer and want to use a cutoff and closure, we can base it on any kind of cutoff process, cutoff time frame that you want. The disposition authority is going back to all those regulations. Think about this as your one audited change of things that are modifying to my retention schedule. So if my auditor came back to me and said, hey, Sue, why are you keeping your records for 7 years? I have all those legal justifications in my system, right? Very cool. I can also identify in my system where records are considered part of a case. So good example, this may not be a good example, but if this was an employee folder, I can say all the employee folders are considered cases. So when Sue Gibbons wins the lottery, 5 years of records in that folder. When it comes up for disposition 7 years later, I'm going to approve Sue's folder, not every record in it, and all the records get disposition. The security of the records is key. Who needs access to the records and what kind of access do they need? There are certain levels of security roles that we provide as far as Gimmal, records managers, local records officers, as well as administrators. And then we can identify those vital records, and I mentioned those before. These are ones that we may have a permanent preservation on, or maybe it's indefinite retention, or we use them for business continuity. Well, I want to eyeball on them every 5 years, and I want to have sent every 5 years. I'm going to send out to a group of people who are my vital record reviewers. A person's going to review it. We're going to have a date and the last reviewer. So if an auditor comes back to you and say, hey, Sue, when was the last time you did that review on all these records? Here's the time. And then we go one level deeper. So based on security and SharePoint, we can do security, say if Amy was part of the records manager team or the local records officer, but Amy does not have access to confidential or top secret type records, I can lock Amy out of this audit category. So based on a setting of a field, a property, I can lock those records to specific users and groups. And what happens with all of this, I take all these records, this retention schedule, and what I do is I now publish it out to one-to-many record centers in SharePoint so that I have a consistent approach on how retention is going to be applied. I have one place. Think about those of you who are really familiar with SharePoint, the content type hub, I think of this as the record hub for my record program because I have one place to make all my decisions. Now, as those records come in, we have tools such as of reporting, which allows us to go out there and look at all records that are eligible for destruction, right? And when they're up for destruction is in the next 30 days or within a certain date range. We can do legal holds on records. I can either actually go out there and do a legal hold that says, go out there and find all my records that have to do with Sue Gibbons. Now, Sue Gibbons may have training records that are in the training category or her personnel folder, and I can actually go out there, find all those records, put that criteria in, apply the hold, and I can set that hold up as a recurring hold. So every time I create a new record, it's automatically placed on hold, or I can put the hold container on hold. Now, a lot of you may think, when we're working with records, isn't it kind of funny that the records go into that record center? What about my end user experience? Do they have to go to the record center in order to get those records? Their answer to that is no. What we've thought about from a Gimmal standpoint is the usability of this. So we could, as part of your process, and this works beautifully if you're like doing a hybrid from O365 to on-prem, we can actually set up a process. You can see here I have a policies and procedures library where I have, when the policy is considered a record, I'm pushing back into my site what we call a convenience copy. I'm just going to open up the ribbon here so you can see the pretty icon. So you can see that we have convenience copies. Now this convenience copy is actually linked to an official record in my record center. And when that official record, when that record, immutable record, is up for disposition, it knows I have one-to-many convenience copies out there, and upon approval of the disposition of the official records, those convenience copies go away. So it mitigates the risk of the convenience copies staying out any longer than my official record. Think about all that stuff you have in your file system that nobody ever cleans up. This is the cleanup process. Now, the other component of convenience copies is that what if in 2000, I have one for 2012, I really like it, I want to use that as the basis of my next, say, LEAF program, because I haven't changed it, sadly, it's since 2012, I can actually come in here, either unlink it, which now makes it a document in my site, or rehydrate it, which means I'm going to disconnect it from my record, put a copy into my site, like this one here, and now I have a document that I can start collaborating on. So cool way of me still ensuring that I have policy applied, risk is mitigated, all my records are under the appropriate control, my convenience copies are where people typically go to find the information in the sites, and everything is in sync. So I think that I have about 2 minutes. I'm sorry I went a little bit long today, Amy, but let's see if we have any questions for the team. And I'm sorry, today I didn't get to show you physical. I can pop it up real quick if there's no questions, Amy.
No, there's no questions at this time, so if you want to show that real quick, that'd be great.
Actually, I'm not going to show it right now because my VM went away.
Oh, okay.
The physical records, our physical information management, basically utilizes SharePoint content types, allows you to do circulation management of those physical records, so I can check things out, check them in, but the reality is that when I'm working with those records, where's my cursor? When I'm working with those records under those physical records are under the same controls as all my electronic records and all my email records. That's the focus of what we're trying to do here. So physical will show up just like electronic. The difference is that we'll have a ribbon here for my physical saying that I can do some physical things. So from a physical standpoint, I can relate my records together, so I can have folders in a box. I can request folders. I can create transmittal forms for my folders. But from a disposition standpoint for physical, it's a two-step process. And the reason I say that is that when I have a physical box and it's stored in some file of shelf on some file room, I can't just destroy it out of SharePoint. Unlike my electronic, which is right here, if I had, say, my tax files, my cursor's going a little crazy here, Amy. I looked at my tax files, right? And I looked and I opened them up. When I say these, say, purchase orders are eligible for destruction, wow, it's really crazy now. If the purchase orders are eligible for destruction and I approve it, they're going to go away. But with physical, it's this two-step process. So I can say, I have all these physical records that, according to my retention schedule, are eligible for destruction. And when I approve it, when I say they will go into a pen state until I get some information back from my third-party vendor that those physical items have actually been destroyed. Typically, that's a destruction certificate, and then the final disposition happens. So, Amy, I think I've gone a little bit beyond our 30 minutes. I hope everyone has enjoyed this session today. Please ping us if you want some more. This has been a really fast and furious view of records management with Gimmal.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, I think you did a great job presenting and showing the tools and the business case for doing these things, as we don't have any question and answers today. So thank you, everybody. And again, a recording of this will be sent to all registrants within 24 to 48 hours. And we've enjoyed having you with us today. And be sure to tune in next week when we go talk more about the metadata and tagging documents. Thank you.